in general terms, and he has acted as editor-in-chief of Eurasian Business Review. He's also editor of Small Business Economics, also associate editor of Industrial Corporate and Change. So he has a very long academic experience, and I think it's, as I said before, it's really a pleasure to have you here again with us. And well, he will talk about, well, a challenge that we have in nowadays, in this period of time of change, and absolutely in this period of radical transformation. What about labor market and all these transformations, about artificial intelligence? But I think that it's better to leave the floor to Professor Vivarelli to tell us everything about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for the introduction. Really kind of introduction. Yes, I'm very pleased to be here again in this department. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, as Maria, we can think about future collaboration in between the two departments, even for application and a European project and workshop and so forth. The topic today is, in a way, is a classical topic. As you can see in the slides on the left, you have the Luddit in Manchester, the very first industrial revolution, destroying machinery as a reaction of the working class to the introduction of the first mechanization, particularly in the textile industry at that time. Nowadays, the fear is about robotization. Robots kill all human jobs. So we have different kind of aptitude and forecasting on that. We will briefly see in 5 minutes the general debate, just to give you the flavor of the general debate. The paper is actually it's a new paper with Giacomo Gagnoli, Vincent Van Roy, and Daniel Verdesi. Giacomo is in Bremen University, Vincent is at GRC in Sevilla, and Daniel is at WIPO in Geneva. And it's a recent paper where we change a little bit the focus in terms of what is the common focus in the debate, but we will discuss immediately. So, artificial intelligence is considered, at least by some, as a new general purpose technology using a mainstream terminology, or a kind of new paradigm using a more revolutionary terminology. Anyway, something revolutionary, changing the set. Why? Because it's very pervasive, so it's going to virtually all sectors. If you think about algorithms, they go to platforms, of course, they go to services, but they go everywhere. So when you have a kind of key technology that is pervasive and is really new, you can think about a new paradigm, a new kind of industrial revolution. And we are talking about Industry 4.0 revolution based on this kind of technology. The debate is whether it's really something revolutionary in comparison of the ICT that were actually fostering and driving the paradigm, starting in the 70s as an experiment and then booming in the 80s and 90s. So whether this is really a discontinuity and a new paradigm, or is something that is still very, very much related to the ICT, so it's kind of articulation of. we try to investigate with Enrico Santarelli and Jacopo Staccioli these issues basically in a distributed kind of paper that you can find in Journal Technology Transfer, it just came out this year. And we conclude that yes, it's pervasive, is in a way revolutionary, but still very connected to the ICT. So the leading countries, the leading firms, and even the leading basic technology are the same. So what we discuss is probably confirmation of the leaderships by US and by some big five kind of corporation, Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and so on. But still, the technology is really disrupting and is really having a kind of impact that is large and probably specific and peculiar. And it is some problem in dealing with the mouse. The topic today is about the possible labor market impact, as was the case in the first industrial revolution, whether this kind of technology will be massively labor saving, and actually the debate is focusing on this possible labor saving impact. This paper is shifting the focus from the demand side, the adoption of robots and the AI algorithms and so on and so forth, is shifting to the supply sectors. That is, the sectors of the firms actually producing the new technologies, patenting AI, to see whether on that side we can identify some kind of product innovation and labor-friendly impact. So the novelty is this one, is shifting upstream to see whether there is some kind of complementarities in between the production of new invention and innovation and labor on that side. Even if, as I mentioned, the debate is dominated by the concern about technological unemployment. Why? Because this kind of artificial intelligence devices that are behind the self-driving cars, that are behind the humanoid cognitive kind of robots that are actually substituting not only manufacturing and manual works and jobs as was in the past, but they are now substituting cognitive kind of jobs, including university professor. If you think about video lectures, if you think about new devices for teaching, and so on and so forth. And this debate is across the different disciplines. The big names in management scholars are Ben Johnson and McAfee and MIT. They are now saying that this time is different. So their opinion is that the nature and the pace of current technological change that is based on AI is such as that it is difficult for the market to compensate possible job losses. So when they say this time is different, they say two things. They say that these AI technologies are really revolutionary, so introducing a new paradigm. And the other more subtle kind of message is that this time is different because in the past, the labor-saving technology was in a way compensated by market forces. That is what economists think about. The economists, they think that you may have, you surely have a direct labor-saving effect, but then you have market forces that compensate and counterbalance the initial labor-saving effect, and in the steady state, so you have a full employment. So there is a kind of confidence by economists kind of optimistic confidence. And they are management scholars, but they are referring to this when they say this time is different. Fred Osborne paper is the most cited in the literature, in this kind of literature nowadays. Is the most, really, the highly cited paper that came out in 2014, then was published in the Journal in the Technological Forecasting Social Change 5 years ago. They are sociologists from Oxford University, and what they did some kind of focus group with experts in different sectors, managers, experts, professors, and so on and so forth, in order to see which are the occupations at risk according to the opinion of the focus group. And they did a kind of statistical analysis on the occupation in US, and they came out with this prediction that about almost 50% of jobs are at risk according to their estimates. 47% to be precise. This has been considered over pessimistic. After 2017, there's a plethora of studies doing similar kind of exercise in terms of forecasting. And the general outcome is in between a lower bound of 9%, 9% of occupation are considered risk according to the OECD, to up to 47. This is the more pessimistic. And then you have other studies that are in between. Why such differences in this kind of scenarios? They are very different according to the data, the countries, and the methodology. Particularly, the main point is whether you see at either occupation or tasks. Fred Osborne, they see about occupation. So if some of the things you do in your occupation can be automatized, your jobs, your occupation is at risk. If you shift to a much more granular analysis in terms of task, you realize that there are some jobs where some tasks can be automatized, but not others. So maybe some of our lecturing, the more routinized one, can be actually automatized, but not other, more creative or more interactive with students. If you think about a radiologist, X-rays can be automatized and the machine is doing the job better than the human eye, but some other about, you know, the diagnosis and the prognosis can't be automatized. So in that case, one task can be automatized, but not the entire occupation. And that's why when you look at studies looking at tasks, scenarios are more optimistic. Anyway, still a large number of jobs are at risk. Even the OECD 9% is an average, and then you have in some sectors, some countries, you may have 20–25%. Economists, they came as the latest in the debate. Now the trendsetter, as in other issues, is Daron Acemoglu. Papers with Pasquale Restrepo, both theoretical and empirical, with some kind of schizophrenia, because on the theoretical side they tend to be optimistic. And they tend to propose again what was proposed by classical economists, like, for instance, David Ricardo, but even Jean-Baptiste, John Stuart Mill, and then proposed again by neoclassical, like John Hicks and others, Knut Wicksell and others, and then by the current literature, the very, very current literature. And basically the idea theoretically is what I mentioned before. Economists, they think that there is kind of direct labor-saving effect. If you think about an isoquant, the isoquant is going towards zero, so you can produce the same amount of output with less capital, less labor. So by definition, the direct effect is labor displacement. But then you have market forces, price and the income mechanism. Because if you introduce process innovation, your unit costs are going down. If you are in a perfect competition environment, your prices are going down. Demand is increasing, production is increasing, employment is increasing. So this is the main channel to compensate initial labor displacements, what Acemoglu calls productivity effect. On the other hand, if you are not in a perfect competition, you don't have this kind of one-to-one relationship between unit cost reduction and price reduction, but you have some additional profits. But according to the classical and the mainstream debate nowadays, these profits will be invested in capital formation, so you have capital accumulation according to Acemoglu and Restrepo, and so you have another channel to compensate. So at the end of the day, you go back to the full employment equilibrium. Of course, a much more critical point of view can figure out possible market failures in this kind of compensation mechanism. And in other papers, I devoted a lot of attention on these possibility of market failures that make this kind of compensation very, very partial or even tiny. If we have time, we can go back on that. Why I said that they are a little bit schizophrenic, because if you read their model on the American Economic Review paper in 2018, and then you see the geopolitical economy paper. There's an empirical paper in the GPE a couple of years ago. In the empirical paper, they tend to be over pessimistic. What they do is to see a robot adoption in US local labor market with a kind of robot penetration proxied by IFR, International Federation of Robotics data, so that you have this kind of sectoral penetration rates of robots applied to the different geographical contexts, and this is something. This is an assumption. I mean, because it's regional economies. They tend to be very skeptical about that, because you cannot assume that, I don't know, electronic sectors has the same kind of nature in San Diego and in Utah, even if you are in the same sector. So they apply this kind of penetration rate across different regions in the US. Since this is endogenous, they instruments by European penetration rate, so they have this kind of double assumption. So you have a penetration rate in Utah that are measured according to the penetration rate in the same sectors in Stuttgart and in Bavaria, and they found out a massive labor-saving effect. Take into account that when you look at the robot adoption, about 40% of firms that are implementing robots are in the automobile industry. Anyway, this is the focus of the debate, and then that paper originated a plethora of replication studies in Germany, ARTS and others, OECD, and they have similar results. But the point is they see just the downstream effect. So that's the paper I just described, and these are some replication studies, particularly the one by Chiacchio is about these European countries: Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and using exactly the same methodology. and using nuts region, and they confirm this kind of labor-saving impact. Asimov's labor paper came out in 2017, then it was published 3 years after. Grants and micros are a little bit different in kind of methodology, and they don't find these significant results. Then you have this Doubt and Tal, that is now an economic journal, if I remember well, where they find that there is not such a massive labor-saving effect, but there is in some kind of manufacturing employment. And very recently you have some papers based on firm-level data, because the rest of the literature is about sectoral data. When you look at the firm-level data, you generally find a positive labor impact, even if the technology is labor-saving. But that's mainly due to competitive effects. So that particular firm is implementing a labor-saving technology, but is getting market share at the expenses of the competitors, what is called the business stealing effect. And so that particular firm is increasing its employment. So you have to pay attention to control for this kind of business stealing effect. Anyway, they tend to control. They have positive impact. Some of these papers, when they shift to the sectoral analysis, they have the opposite. So they have a positive employment impact for those firms implementing robots, but then at the level of the sectors, they find a negative impact. But most of the literature on the empirical side is on the adoption. Our point is that, starting from Schumpeter, but also mentioning Marx, you have another way to look at innovation. Innovation is not just an efficiency gain, it's not just a shift in the production function. You have process innovation, this kind of innovation on the one side, but you also have product innovation. And this is a distinction that was introduced more than 1 century ago by Schumpeter. And when you talk about product innovation, this is by definition labor-friendly, because product innovation is creating something new. So you have new product, sometimes you have new sectors. If you think about the automobile at the beginning of 20th century, it was booming of new sectors, new related sectors, and the booming in employment. The interesting point is that the same kind of innovation can be seen as a product innovation in the upstream sectors and the process innovation in the downstream sectors, even the robot. The robot has to be built by firms. So if we think about booming of robotization around the world, what I expect in Japan, where robots, most of robots are produced, in South Korea, is an increase in employment. And that's exactly what we try to do in this paper. These are a couple of, even Karl Marx. Karl Marx was very, very critical about the compensation theory by classical economists. He was the first to look at market failures, the possibility that actually this kind of price and income compensation may fail. But then, talking about product innovation, he was optimistic. He said, well, yes, if technological change is taking the form of producing new products, this is labor friendly. But his conclusion that at that time of the second industrial revolution, process innovation that were dominating. So 90% of innovation was process innovation and very few product innovation. So he was expecting technological employment at that time. So product innovation should be labor friendly, and this will be the focus of our research. Even product innovation should not be overemphasized, as discussed in these slides. first you have to compare, as Marx did at that time, the weight of process innovation and the weight of product innovation. So in our case, you have to, if we still talk about robots, the paper is about the artificial intelligence, so much more large families of technology. Anyway, just to make the example in terms of robots, you have to compare the labor-friendly effect in the upstream sectors where robots are produced with the massive technological unemployment in the adoption side. Then you have to see the income elasticity of the kind of product innovation that you are introducing. If you are introducing a product innovation in food, that's interesting, but that's not a massive impact in terms of employment. If you are introducing a kind of innovation in a smartphone, that's very, very income elastic. So you have to think about, to test that particular parameter. Product innovation for one sector can be process innovation for other sectors. We already discussed this one. You have both a welfare effect and substitution effect. The welfare effect is the labor-friendly impact. The substitution effect is when a new product is displacing an older one. So let's think about Spotify. Spotify is actually displacing MP3. MP3 had displaced in the past the CD. The CD had displaced the vinyl. So you have new products, but you don't have a real impulse, a real driving force in terms of job creation effect. So for instance, in terms of artificial intelligence, you have to see whether the algorithm is really new. So an algorithm for a platform is a really new stuff. But an algorithm that is just substituting another software product is not so strong in terms of labor creating effect. You may have a problem of displacing this kind of business steering effect that we already mentioned in comparison of the non-innovators. And you may have complementarity between product and process innovation. If for the new products you need a new machinery, this machinery are labor saving, you have to test which of the different kind of effect is dominating. Having said that, so with all these cautious, still we can simplify the arguments and we can see the innovation input more or less shared in between R&D, both internal and external R&D, and embodied technological change. Embodied technological change is the case of robots. I'm implementing machineries, robots, and I'm implementing process innovation. This is obviously more prone to labor saving effect. This kind of sharing of the rectangular is not random. I mean, if you take the community innovation surveys all around European countries, on average, we have 50% of innovative expenditure devoted to internal and external R&D, and 50% devoted to embodied technological change. Then, of course, according to the different countries, the different regions, and the different firms, you may have very, very different kind of sharing. If you go to Sweden, high-tech, large firms in Sweden, R&D is dominating. If you go to the more traditional textile industry in Spain or Greece or Southern Europe or Italy, embodied technological change is dominating, particularly in the SMEs, small and medium enterprise. But on average, all across Europe is 50-50, more or less. This input are getting this kind of output. Again, if you make an average of innovation surveys, firms, they reply that what they do is about 40%, a little bit less than 40% just process innovation. About 25-30% just product innovation, and the rest, about 1/3, doing both product and process innovation. When you look at R&D data, in a way, you have this kind of bias. I mean, R&D is much more related to product innovation that is more related to job creation. And I have some papers when we use R&D data, and we do find some kind of complementarity effects with labor. Very tiny in terms of magnitude, but significant. If you use biotechnological change measures, and again I have some paper on that, you are more as a kind of negative bias, if you like, using different proxies of technologies. According to the different proxies of technology, you may have a bias in terms of the eventual impact in terms of employment. In this paper we use patents in AI. And I would say that patent as well is more linked ex ante to job creation. And this could be a limitation of these studies, because the propensity for patenting by the firms is larger when you have a product, because a product can be it's obvious, can be seen, can be dismantled, so you can do reverse engineering, and so you have to patent. Let's think about the drug or vaccine. This has to be patented. Process innovation, you can keep the secrecy in terms of your internal organization within the firms. So if you get 100 patents, 80%, three-quarters are actually product innovation. So if such is the case, working in terms of patenting, in terms of data, you have a little bit this kind of bias. And that's actually what we find. We find some kind of labor-friendly impact. So we have to be aware of this kind of limitation. This is something that is taken from another paper, but just to make an illustration of the entire theoretical setting. This is taken from a recent paper in Research Policy, where we talk about upstream sectors R&D based, and with a kind of labor creation, job creation impact, producing products that are used as machinery in the downstream sectors. In the downstream sectors, you may have the replacement investments, and you have to compare the expansion investments with the replacement investments, with the labor destruction on these sides and labor creation on these sides. We can see that the current literature, particularly focusing on robots, is looking at the downstream sectors, is looking here at this area. And you have robots and other, particularly robots, and other artificial intelligence devices taken as adoption of technologies to detect a possible labor destruction impact. In this paper, we are looking at the providers of AI in terms of firms patenting AI and the possible labor creation effect. The econometrics, maybe I think I'm already half an hour, so I can be a little bit fast on that, but we can go in the details if you are interested. This is the specification that I like, that I also use in other papers, in order to test the impact of innovation on labor demand. This is employment by firm I in time t. You have basically to test beta 4. And that's okay, with a kind of lag, because innovation may take some time to display their effect. But first you have to control for the business stealing effect. So you have to control for some kind of output measure in order to get into account that, of course, you have an increase in employment. This can be entirely due to a competitive effect at the expenses of the competitors. You have to control for the cost of labor, because you expect a beta 2 negative, and you have to control for gross investments that, according to the role embodied technological change, can have a positive or a negative impact. Generally, the expansionary impact is dominating. So beta 3 is effectively positive. And you have to control for individual fixed effects, and well, this is the usual error term.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
But the whole point isn't it that the beta 3 might not be, might change? I mean that the degree of complementarity between labor and capital might be different? I was saying the whole point about artificial intelligence, isn't it that the elasticity of substitution between capital and labor might change due to artificial intelligence, so the beta 3 will actually change?
In a way, beta 3, you may have a kind of not clear expected sign, whether you have a dominance of expansionary or intensive way of technology or of investment. This is mainly due, for instance, in the when we tested this model in the research policy paper. Here, what we have the possibility to distinguish using OECD data. We distinguish in between scrapping, substitution investments, that is actually implementing new technologies, and the purely expansionary kind of investments. And in doing that, we actually found out different signs. So a positive sign for expansionary investments and a negative sign for the substitution scrapping kind of investments. When you look at adoption, as a general specification, this general specification can you use both for the upstream and for the downstream sectors. For the downstream sectors, here you may have some kind of embodied technological change that is generally difficult to disentangle, particularly at the level of the firm. Because I don't know that kind of investments made by the firm that is in a way innovative and implementing new technologies, or just scrapping. That means that this computer is just substituted by the same computer or a new vintage. If you have a new vintage, you are implementing new technologies, so beta 3 can be negative. In this particular paper, what we are focusing on is the upstream sector.
So you assume that away, basically that happens in the downstream, and you assume this substitution away, basically, right?
Sorry, I did.
Isn't it that one? No, I said that. Okay, so you abstract from what is going on in the downstream,
okay,
and you assume any substitution.
In very abstract terms, I mean this specification, if in a way you are able to disentangle the gross investments into the two components, you may have a negative impact. Absolutely. In my experience, what we got when we use gross investments, without the possibility to distinguish, we generally have a positive one. And the literature is generally getting a beta 3 positive. But as in the paper that I just mentioned, when you can distinguish, you may detect the embodied technological change and negative impact on labor, definitely. The point is that this variable may be endogenous, particularly output, wage, and innovation may be decided by the firm at the same time, or at the same time, so there's a kind of simultaneous. And on top of that, when you have to estimate the demand for labor, you don't have to forget the lag-dependent variable. The main predictor of employment in the firm today is the firm that is the employment yesterday. Why? Because hiring and firing is very, very complicated, it's very, very time consuming, it's very costly. So this is the typical example even when Ariane Bond 30 years ago, they introduced the GMM, the example was exactly the demand for labor. So we have to control for the lag-dependent variable. The lag-dependent variable is by definition endogenous, because according to your model is driven by the same regressor, but even the other variable may be endogenous. So what I generally assume is the possibility that all of them are endogenous. I test through a GMM. GMM-CIS is generally preferred. GMM-CIS is preferred to the GMM-DIF when you have a very, very autoregressive kind of time series. That is the case of labor. It's very, very sticky. When you have a cross-section dimension that is higher in terms of variability, in terms of numerosity and variability, and this is generally the case. Here what we have is 3,500 firms over 17 years. So, and the between variability is much more obvious than the within one. So this is will be estimated by GMM-CIS. The data come from the PASTAT database at the European Patent Office with some kind of strong bias. For instance, the US is really underscored in this database. Asia is okay. Europe is maybe overrepresented because it's in Munich. But the main limitation is that the US is less represented. So we get from the European Patent Office PASTAT, we have data about patents, particularly patent families. So we don't have double counting. In PASTAT you have 90 different countries. So if you patent the same watch to 3 different countries, this is one family. But you can weight your patents according how many countries are covered. This will be the way how we weighted the importance of the different patents. So we started for PASTAT with this kind of device that is at the GRC. We made a textual analysis and we identified AI patenting according to some keywords in the title and the abstract. We don't have the entire text of the patent, just the title and the abstract. If some words are named in the patents, this is considered an AI patenting. Definition of AI can be very different, and the literature are different. Even, I mean, the literature is about neuroscience or physics and engineering and at the very end economics. So you may have a very, very narrow concept of AI about machine learning, deep learning, speech recognition, computation, or you may have a broader concept of AI, including, for instance, robots and all robotization, including big data analysis. And in this paper we use a broader definition. And we don't do any kind of restriction to terminological classes. Some kind of literature restrict patenting to some classes. As we left open the classes, but we looked for this kind of words related to AI, based on previous papers by my co-authors, and we identified 3,000 worldwide. So this is PASTAT worldwide. We identified only 3,500 firms with at least one AI patenting in the period. AI patenting family in the period. Then from PASTAT you don't have any other data, so you don't have data about the employment or sales. And so we merge with Orbis, and from Orbis Orbis and also the patent Orbis database that has you have to pay for that, and we got data about turnover. We don't have data about value added, that is the best, the first best. So we had the output is controlled in terms of turnover, sales, and then employment, and then patenting in non-AI fields. So all the other kind of innovation apart from the AI patenting. These are the awards. So we have everything about robots. We have big data. So that's as I mentioned, you is a broad kind of definition of AI. Of course, we have everything about machine learning, face, facial recognition, decision tree, decision data sciences, and so on and so forth. Well, we did some kind of trimming of the outliers, both in terms of growth, in terms of levels. But at the end, we excluded about 100% of the left and right tails of the distribution. And these are the data: employment, turnover, that is our check for output, gross investments, labor cost per employee. This is the best proxy, because most firms are not so interested in wages, are interested in the cost for laborers in deciding their demand for labor. And then we have the patent, AI patent families and non-AI patent families. These are just the number, the logarithm of the number. And then we weight the importance of these kind of patents according to the number of countries where the family has been patented. Because patents have to be weighed in some way. The usual way is is using forward citation. Forward citation for AI is a little bit a problem, because the booming of AI, we have 17 years in between 2000 and 2016, but the booming of AI is very recent. So the forward citation, we will probably in the future. So we opted to wait in terms of family size.
Yes.
And maybe they have to switch off the mic.
Maybe you can just
I can
warn the person. There is someone with the microphone.
Please, someone has the micro open. Please close down the.
Thank you. And so we waited in terms of patent family size. The assumption is that since patenting is very costly, if you decide to patent in Japan, US, Germany, and other European countries, that means that you think that your patents are really valuable. So this is a way to wait for the different importance of the different patents.
I think somebody wants to make a
Marco, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Just a quick suggestion. Would you be able to weight your patents by the number of citations to measure relevance?
Yeah, that's thank you for the comment. It's what I mentioned before, and what we actually use with some of the co-authors in a previous paper that was about patenting in all technologies, and we made this kind of we use forward citation normalized by technological fields, because you have very different habits of different kind of different propensity to cite in the different technological class. But here we decide not to run for citation for the reason I mentioned before, because we have the bulk of patenting in the very last years, 2014, 2015, 2016. And so the forward citation are still to come out in a way.
Okay.
That's why we. This is always the case. Forward citation are always truncated by definition, because we don't know their future. But in this particular case, the bulk of the distribution was very, very recent. And on the other side, we had this option of the family size that is used by the literature and is an alternative way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So these are, well, the main standard deviation. We try to split the sample to see whether there are some peculiarities. And we have split the sample in services versus manufacturing, and we got some results that we will see in a while. We split it according to the age, because the idea is that probably the front runner in AI are quite relatively young firms like Google. So we have firms before 1990 and after 1990. And as you can see, this is a little bit embarrassed, but still the older firms are 1/3. Then we have the AI intensity, what we get the median, and we consider intensive in AI those firms above the median to see whether we have a kind of increasing or decreasing returns in the job creating effect. So the more the firms that are more focusing and more active in AI within this population where you want to have at least one patent in AI are more eco-friendly than the others. And then we split it according to the firm size, SMEs versus larger firms, but this last splitting was not informative. We didn't get any kind of particular difference with this data and this analysis. This is the sector splitting. Not surprising, you have a concentration in electronics and machineries. These are where robots are and other manufacturing devices. On the other hand, telecommunication and scientific services. This is where algorithms, data scientists, and this kind of technology and jobs are. As I mentioned one important limitation is the underrepresentation of US, while Europe is overrepresented. Japan is overrepresented, but is also very, very strong in AI, particularly robot technologies, and South Korea as well. South Korea is impressive. Is really not catching up. Is leapfrogging OECD countries, at least in terms of technology. These are the results. Just to check for the control, as expected. Well, we made the usual comparison with the ordinary square and fixed effect. So what you have to get is the lagged coefficient, the coefficients of the lagged dependent variable that has to be in between these two boundaries, and this is the case, both in terms of patents and patent family size. Then we have output that is positive related to employment, cost of labor that is negatively related and very significant, and gross investments where the expansion effect seems to be dominant, even if they're significant and not 90%. This can be partially due to the composition effect of the substitution and expansion effects. I don't know what. Yes, I have the zoom on the diagnostic tests are reassuring as far as the lab test is. They are okay. The Hansen test apparently is not okay, because the Hansen test is the null is that you use correct instrumentation in terms of the lagged differences and lagged levels, because this is a GMMC instruments, and in this case the null of good instrumentation is rejected. So apparently very, very bad news. But when you have many observations, in this case We have 26,000 of observation. There is a tendency of the test to over-reject. This has been shown by the econometrics literature. Rudman is a reference. So above a certain threshold, when you still have 2,000, 3,000 observation, the Hansen's argument is reliable. Above a certain threshold is always significant and rejecting the null. So what is generally done is to have a random subsample and to test again. And we did it, and when we take, I don't remember, 10 or 20% of the observation, the null is not rejected. This is discussed in the paper. Zooming on the main results. So the main results, they seems to point out a labor-friendly impact of AI patenting and non-AI patenting, more or less similar. So as you can see, is about, and this is, everything is in log, so the LCD is about 3%, so it's very small. Please.
5 minutes.
Ah, yes, sure. I thought it was a question. It's enough. So 3%, that means that if you double your patenting activities, you get a 3% increase of employment. So it's a tiny effect. It's significant, it's positive, but tiny. And on top, this is just number of patents. That is not so good in terms of proxy of technology. If we weight in terms of the importance of the patenting activities, this effect seems to be related just to AI patenting. So when we weight the patent according to the different importance of the different patenting, we really single out something specific to the AI patenting that is positive and significant, while other kind of innovation, at least in the data set, they don't appear so strong in terms of labor-friendly. It could be the case that this kind of general innovation is complementary to the AI. So the idea is that the AI patenting is really driving the overall labor-friendly impact. Splitting the sample, this is just to show that the three splitting are not overlapping. So we are not repeating the same analysis. When we split according to service and manufacturing, we have two different samples that are different, these two samples, by the sample that we have when we split according to the age or the AI intensity. Just going to, yeah, here we have the results. The results on the innovation proxy. So from these results, what we got is that the labor-friendly impact is totally driven by servicing, not by manufacturing. So it seems to be that if you have a job creation effect, is in softwareists, data scientists, these kind of jobs, concentrated in services. And again, the AI, when we weight by patent family size, the impact of AI patenting is larger and more significant. The labor-friendly impact is totally driven by young firms. And if we look at younger firms, is totally driven only by AI, while non-AI patenting is not significant. And we may have a kind of increasing returns. That means that the most firms, more a firm is focusing on AI patenting, larger is the labor-friendly impact. And in this case, is also driven by non-AI. So this is still higher, this is larger, but both are significant. So the general message is, and I come to the conclusion, the general message is that, yes, we do find some evidence that in the providers of the new technologies, where AI is projected and is created, we do have a labor-friendly impact with some qualification. This labor-friendly impact is small. Is very the elasticity is about 3%, so it is small in magnitude, and probably is not compensating what is happening downstreams, what has been analyzed by the rest of the literature. So probably here in the upstream production of AI technology, we have a kind of small labor-friendly impact that is not comparable with the labor-saving impact you may have downstream. On top of that, is small and is actually concentrated in service firms, in young firms, and those firms that are more focusing on the new technologies. So the good news is that yes, product innovation in AI, as was in the past for other product innovation, they may have a labor-friendly impact, but this is small and is actually concentrated in some particular firms and particularly in service sectors. This is a painting by Fernand Léger, 1917, so more than 1 century ago, and Fernand Léger was already thinking that robots may actually displace human beings in cognitive skills. These robots are playing cards, that is really a cognitive skill, cognitive task. Thank you. Any general comments? Well.
Okay.
Can I intervene now, or
Yes, just here. Feel free.
is someone speaking, or
Just have
No, you can, please.
okay? So I found the talk super interesting. I enjoyed this topic a lot, and it's super. It was very detailed, no? The interaction we made, and I think it's important to discuss all the potential mechanisms like you did, because it's a complex subject, no? Just a couple small comments. I think it would be interesting to have finer results by age, to see whether, I mean, is this something about new firms being created, or, I mean, 1990s are still, I would consider that an old firm already. So, I mean, I don't know, it would be nice to know perhaps by something discrete by number, say by firms that are, I don't know, from 5 to 10, from 10 to 15, I don't know, something like that, like break it down a little bit farther. I think that would be interesting. The other thing is, in some of the tables, if you go back to the results table, could you do that, please?
The results?
Yeah, this one's fine.
These are the very general one.
Yeah, this one's fine. I mean, I got a little bit confused because I thought we were talking about patents granted, but here it says patent applications I suppose it's patents granted, right?
No, I think they are application. They are application because in past that you have application. Generally, is the data used the application, particularly for AI, because again, the concentration of the patenting is the very last in the very last years, but. Anyway, the application is still something complicated in Munich. So the idea is that yes, it's not still the innovation that you find in the market, but it's a kind of commitment and sunk cost that is enough to think that that particular firm is very active in the process. And in particular, in terms of AI, think about an algorithm. The possible job creation impact in terms of data scientists, in terms of software, is really before the application. When you have the application, you already have the innovation done. Is not granted, so it's not still in the market, but it's something that is already finalized. But they are applications.
Yeah. Okay. Fair point. I see what you mean. On the other hand, I would be a bit worried if, I mean, for the samples for which you get a zero results, I mean, non-significant. Of course, that could be due to this measurement problem, no? I mean, because the fact that you have applications that are ungranted, considering that granted applications probably, I mean, they should have a stronger contribution, no? So they should have a stronger impact. I mean, to the extent that you bundle applications and granted ones, perhaps you could do a robustness by only including those that are granted and see if results still hold. No, what do you think?
Yeah. Now this could be true. I mean, there could be some kind of delayed possible positive effect that we don't capture. Again, here, what we are interested in is something really complementary to the technologies. So what you get when you grant a patent and you go to the market is really a kind of effect on your sales, on your total revenue, and maybe you get additional employment because you are expanding your output. We are more interested to the very initial stage. But this is something that, yes, we can do. I think that I have to come back to my co-authors. I think that we thought about this. I don't know whether either we don't have the data about the granted, or we try to do the check, but we have a massive decrease in observation. But it's an important point. And the first point is important as well, because we have actually room for doing this kind of more granular check for age, because we have 66% of firms after 1990, so we can split into the case, for instance, and to see what happens.
It would be nice to have like a graph, no, and see if, I mean, over age, the results are somewhat, I mean, maybe they're monotonic and
monotonic, exactly. And to focus on the so-called young innovative companies that are really funded in the last 10 years. Yeah, thank you. That's a good suggestion.
Marco, just a final point. So another thing I was thinking of related to more like the big picture. Since you were discussing potential mechanisms that you had in mind and so on, which I found useful, the way you were highlighting that. So how are you thinking about the role of simultaneous product and process innovation? So suppose some of these patents are process innovation, but are simultaneously, for some, these are also product innovation that's happening at the same time. So conceptually or empirically, how do you handle those cases?
That's challenging. I think that it's difficult to tackle through econometrics or kind of a traditional economics analysis. Probably what you have to do is some kind of technological studies, the kind of stuff that you can find, for instance, in Technovation or this kind of journals, when you actually track a particular innovation, and you really can see what is happening when you are, for instance, you are creating a new algorithm. And then this new algorithm is used in Amazon in the storage, or is used in Amazon in the final stage, in the distribution one. And so to track the same kind of innovation and to see whether the data scientists and the jobs created at the very beginning are a certain number to be compared with the very last one in terms of adoption. So I would tend to think about this kind of technological studies focusing on a particular kind of innovation. I give you another example. In another strand of papers we are producing, we are dealing with USPTO database, USPTO patents in robots. And we found out that actually most of robots are produced by machinery sectors, firms and firms in manufacturing, in the electronic and machinery. And some of them are patented by the users. So for instance, UPS is patenting a drone, and the role of the drone is to take the parcel from the truck, entering the store, possibly having the barcode to entering the store and delivering the parcel. Some of the new buildings are now thought to have a kind of roof when these kind of drones they leave the parcels. So in that case, you even do a kind of case studies on UPS, and to see whether on the one hand they got some kind of labo-friendly impact in terms of producing these drones and hiring data scientists and I don't know, physics and engineers to have the drone, but on the other hand, this is actually substituting the delivering demand, and so to see the balance. So I see a scope for this kind of more technological innovation studies in terms of case or case studies based on a particular multinational firms or on a particular technology.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks to you. Thanks for the comments.
Thank you, Sir. Anybody else like to make a question?
Yeah. Do you hear me properly? Hi?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, Michael. First of all,
It's
from
from
interaction, listen to your results. And I know that my question is not related directly with your analysis, but a natural idea that comes to my mind is the Morales paradox. And I want to ask you if, based on your results, you have some intuitions about which will be the education level distribution in the labor force with all this AI evolution, and also distribution of income, not inside industries or across industries, but in labor-wise related.
Thank you.
Those are my questions.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an important dimension that sometimes is neglected. It's surely neglected in these studies. Even the ICT technologies, and even before, what you have at the same time is a labo-same indirect effect, but you also have a kind of bias. So in the 90s, we were talking about skill bias technological change. So technological change, labor saving, but also in favor of skills and disadvantage to the low skill. Then the shift was moved to routinized versus non-routinized jobs. So routinized jobs at risk and non-routinized jobs more preserved. And this was exactly the debate about polarization, because at that time the idea was that jobs at risk, they were in the middle of the distribution, and in the middle of distribution you also find the problems in terms of wages, in terms of wage dynamics, and what at that time were considered preserves in the very upskilling and some low skills but not automatizable, like for instance the healthcare or the personal care or the cleaning kind of jobs that are low skilled but completely automatable. Nowadays the issue is even more complicated, because in principle this kind of algorithms and kind of AI devices may attack managers, for instance. There are some studies that they see that managers are absolutely at risk, particularly managers due to monitoring. Because now you are not confronting with a manager saying you are underperforming. You are confronting a median in the algorithms. Is the algorithm saying that you are underperforming because you are below the average? So you don't need any manager for monitoring. So some managers that were considered 10 years ago non-routinized cognitive skills, now they may be displaced by algorithms. And you may think about the humanoid robots doing even this kind of personal care services. So now the issue in terms of possible risk of automation, it's more open than in the past. It appears to be more pervasive. And so in terms of provision of skills and supply of education, supply of skills, it's a complex issue. And there are some stuff that are surely okay. There's data scientists, and we are actually opening up in our university a lot of masters data scientists. So data scientists, this kind of profession, surely are complementary to the new technologies. But the rest of the spectrum is more complicated than 10 years or 15 years ago.
Okay, last question, no?
Yeah, very quickly. Well, thank you. It was an excellent presentation. I think that the key is this differentiation between process and product innovation. Because in fact, and it came to me rather a surprise to see that in manufacturing the facts were just zero, and in services, because we could argue, I think, in manufacturing it's basically a product innovation, basically because what we are doing is producing new machinery or whatever for other purposes. So you may expect there some sort of extension of your market, product market, and then maybe, as you suggested, that extending the hiring of new workers. While in the services, it seems to me that it's more about cost reducing in terms of process. So it would be more about process innovation. So you may not, I don't know if you can just sort this out, but I would say that when you develop some sort of algorithm, it's basically not, well, there may be some firms that are selling it, but it's quite often maybe more about improving your services. So I don't know if you can really tackle this difference between considering it as a process or a product because actually it's something that you mentioned, but I would stress it even further in your motivation and introduction, is the fact that the displacement effect in product innovation may counterbalance the positive effects. But in this case, I would say that artificial intelligence is pretty new. I mean, I'm not sure if they are displacing many jobs or products or whatever, but creating new ones in terms of that's something that has not been done before. Even in the example of the cars, there used to be wagons and horses and stuff. So, but in this case, when you define an algorithm to control for what you just said, it's the work as a supervisor or their work before, just no other way to do it just by applying human beings. So I think that it could maybe, as actually the previous question mentioned, I think these differences between product and process, they could be quite interesting. And a very quick last question. So I don't know if you mentioned it, but it's a 17 years panel. So the number of small firms is quite large, and so attrition is something that that you consider, or I guess you just control or something that you didn't mention. And I don't know if it's that an important issue.
Let's start from the last point. These SMEs are according to the European definition, so are firms below 250. So very micro firms are not very numerous in this. There are not so many micro firms, and this is the mean in terms of the law. There are small firms, but not micro. Here you have the weight of services is about 45, and I think that the particular kind of textual analysis we did in terms of AI technologies is getting a lot in terms of services, providing the algorithms, providing the so software house, this kind of activities. Applying the same kind of analysis to the overall innovation, you generally find the manufacturing is dominating. And if you look at R&D or if you look at other proxy, you may find this kind of labo-friendly impact in manufacturing as well. The way how we interpret our results is that looking at this particular kind of patenting based on those keywords, we have robots on the one side. So one kind of interpretation is probably manufacturing firms in machinery size producing robots. They don't have a great compensation in terms of labo friendly, probably because robots are produced by other robots or are just substituting other kind of electronic machinery. Apart from robotics, probably most of the rest of patenting is really in terms of new algorithms, new softwares, and this is where jobs are going up. Think about the American providers of robots, both let's say the software house and the users, because Amazon is probably there, Google is probably there, because the users are also producing and providing new the role of services and the labor-friendly drivers of all the entire stories is in our interpretation is related to this particular kind of technology, at least at this stage, where is basically machine learning, deep learning, algorithms, and this kind of stuff. So the idea is that jobs are created for those kind of professions that are basically services, even in publishing house, this kind of new devices provided by artificial intelligence to support any kind of services activities. Yeah.
Okay.
But